This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Welcome back to part 2 of my interview with ChangeMaker Preston Prince. He's the executive director of the Fresno Housing Authority. He's been running the housing authority in Fresno for 13 years. Preston, in part 1, we talked about the steps you've taken in Fresno. You're leading the way not only with words, but with actions. I really think that's what distinguishes what you are doing here.
I totally appreciate that. I don't know if I'm leading or if I'm leading with my chin, because I definitely have been humbled by it, and to have my own privilege and my own kind of biases just put right back into my face. And, sometimes it's just really painful, right? I'm like, well,
Right.
wait a minute, I'm the good person here, and
I'm
and
the
I'm like,
advocate. Hold on here.
I know. And then I'm like, yeah, but I am doing things without a blink that are just as harmful. So that's one thing. Is it is not easy. It hasn't been easy for me. It has not been easy on the organization, but I feel like we're a better organization. The second thing is it took me a while, and you're probably going to laugh at me. It took me a while to recognize the great customer service I want for my residents starts with the customer service that I provide to my staff. And in many ways, I wasn't doing good customer service to the staff. I was basically saying to them, look, you need to do a better job. You need to be more thoughtful. You need to be more empathetic. But I didn't really stop and say, okay, is the organization listening to you? Are we really including you in decision making? Are we really understanding your perspective? And so that was a hard lesson for me to learn. And that, to tell you the truth, has been one over the last 6 months since our DEI process our assessment has really become more robust. And so that's been hard, to be quite honest, to just be out there about it. We have things that we have to do, but as we do those things, we should be thinking about the impact it has on all of the families that we serve and all of the different demographics. And so when we open up our wait list, or if we have remote inspections happen or virtual inspections happening, we have to be asking the question, is that helping or hurting certain groups? If we have a online application for our Housing Choice Voucher Program, well, what about those people who don't have access to the internet, or maybe don't speak English or Spanish predominantly as their first language, or that they have a mental illness or something like that that prohibits them from being able to access our short window of time of when you can apply, right? We think really hard about our outreach and what are the tools that we could provide to make sure we're reaching out to everyone and giving everyone the same kind of access. And then the last thing I'd say is that there also has to be intentional decision making around. We have limited resources in Fresno. We have upwards of 40,000 households that need affordable housing. We provide 18,000 families with housing, but our turnover is less than 1,000 units a year. So it's going to take us 40 years to serve the unmet need. We built 2,400 housing units over the last 10 years. So it's going to take us another 20 years to build the housing units to meet the unmet need of this community. We have to make decisions on limited resources. And when you make decisions on limited resources, you're really opening up yourself to letting your biases dictate what's happening. And so if you don't stop and ask the question of, are we being fair? And then the second part of that is, should we target to a population that is not being served, right? So do we intentionally limit who's accessing our programs because it's a group that's been disenfranchised and unserved for a long time? So all of that's really about, as I said, intentional decision-making, mindfulness, really having purpose. And that leads to, we need data. We all have gut feelings about what works. We need to get away from those, because I can tell you right now, 90% of the time, I think my gut feelings are wrong. I used to think 90% of the time they were right. Now it's like, yeah, no, I have all kinds of biases that are so embedded in my lens that I look at the world. So it's like, how do you step back and get to data? and really embed that as the philosophy as opposed to let's do things based upon gut.
So let me ask you, speaking of biases, and I think that there's a tandem purpose here. One, the unmet need of housing. There's so much need, and the funding is so competitive and just woefully inadequate. But at the core here, this bias that you're talking about, what is it, if you could summarize how we battle or the root cause of the public's misconception about housing, affordable housing specifically?
I would, so the easy way, let me get to the easy way. The whole idea of the deserving and undeserving poor, I think
Mm-hmm.
really permeates the conversations that happen, and that there's a whole swath of people who just get determined to be undeserving poor, and that there is a lot of reluctance to serve and provide housing to those individuals.
Hmm.
But I think the broader issue is that there's this belief that housing is a commodity and you earn your housing and that you have to prove yourself every step of the way. So the best way I can kind of describe it is a conversation around, should a housing authority provide housing that could be the family could live there forever, or should there be an expectation that they move out?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that there are tensions between those and really trying to ask the question of like, what's the real purpose of the housing? What's the broader economy happening? So let's be quite honest. The Fresno Housing Authority, the 18,000 families we serve, our median household income is $11,000 a year. And so for someone to become income qualified or over income to not qualify for a housing, they're going to probably have to get to $60,000 a year. So a 500% growth in their income. And that's really hard when the jobs that we have in our broader economy don't pay wages at that level. And that the schools haven't been totally successful in preparing kids for jobs, or the transportation system is so terrible, or the health conditions are so poor that we have so many people who have asthma issues that it's hard for them to be able to get into the employment world. To say, well, someone comes into our housing 5 years from now, they should be out of the housing because they have a great paying job, it may not be totally fair. But at the same time, like, how do we create expectations and opportunity for individuals, right? So that they have a mindset and they identify themselves as someone who's able to do something, right? So I feel like that's the big tension is, is our housing forever or is our housing for a short period of time?
Right, because there's
Obviously,
not.
take seniors and people with disabilities out of that
Correct,
conversation.
correct. There's some exceptions there, but you're right. There is a tension here. Is housing a last resort? Is it a stepping stone? Is it really more of an economic stabilizer
Right.
or ability to sort of create some economic improvement? And there is tension there, but I believe if we can chip away at the misconceptions, then there's a chance to also make sure that the funding is there, because right now it's not adequate. The need outweighs the funding. And even with eligibility, it barely is covering the minimums. And it doesn't allow for some of these innovative things. So you guys you out there have to go about this, solving these things in a creative way. But that takes a lot of time to do. I mean, when you talked about working with the continuum of care, behavioral health, veterans, shelter plus, all of these pieces, that takes just so much time, and it makes it so much longer, I believe, to provide essential services. So instead of 18, serving 18,000 people, you maybe could be doing 30,000. Your numbers and your ability to expand your platform for provision and economic stability, is really hindered because the funding's not there. Now, one would argue, no, there's upside because then you can leverage your resources, you can be more creative. I think the phrase mother of necessity, it produces a lot more creativity, but it also limits the ability with your reach, right? It limits your reach in that space. So it's kind of switching in that frame here. Let's talk about some of the creative, innovative things you've done, because the funding hasn't been in place for the physical pieces of this. So, there's some couple of programs that have come, down that you have really taken advantage of, specifically the rental assistance demonstration program. And a lot of Quadell, our clients, have to kind of go through that decision making process. Does it make sense for us? Does it make sense for our community? Do we have the blend of investors and developers that we can, make the deals work? And tell us what you're doing in that space.
So let me start with something just to be very clear. I see myself as a real estate developer. I see myself as a houser who believes at the core of a just society is affordable housing. I definitely see myself as a real estate developer. When I say that, I believe that the Fresno housing must be a real estate developer using sound underwriting principles that creates more housing units so that it can invest back into operations, building more housing units, handle unknown situations, COVID-19 as an example, and also invest back into families. And so we have in Fresno, we have received 35 low-income housing tax credit awards in the 13 years I've been here. 30 of those developments have been placed in service. We have 5 under construction right now. 2 were placed in service post-COVID, so we had to actually open up the doors to 2 properties and move families in
Wow.
post-COVID. And so as an active real estate developer, we're the developer, owner, sponsor, and most of the time we are the manager. We do have a third-party property management for some of our properties. And it's really about recognizing through real estate that we're going to be, because we're not going to necessarily get enough federal funds. And then until the last few years, the state of California had actually cut back on funding. Like the redevelopment authorities went away. But under the last year of Governor Brown and the first 2 years of Governor Newsom, we see a pretty major investment into housing. So we need to be a developer. And that those housing developments that we've done have been half in the city of Fresno, half outside the city of Fresno, so rural and urban. They've been permanent supportive housing to seniors, family housing, mixed use, mixed income. It's the range of housing development. So with all of that said, when I came here in 2007, in 2008, I knew that by then I'd been working on like the Public Housing Reinvestment Initiative, which was a proposal, I think, in 1999. I've been working at the national level about how do we create funds so that we can reinvest and reposition public housing. So 2008, we started the process and we analyzed our entire portfolio and asked the question about the highest and best use of each asset. We categorized them in terms of are they ones that we want to tear down and build new? Are they things that we want to buy and build somewhere else and transfer the assistance? Or were they things that potentially we wanted to just do major renovation? So 2008, 2009, we had gone through this very thoughtful process. And so when the rental assistance demonstration became available, we were one of the first participants. We closed on the first transactions that involved 9% tax credits. So we were like the 8th, 9th, and 10th transactions within the RAD program. But I have to say, we had, instead of us responding to an opportunity, we had really scanned the environment and we thought about like what might be coming down the pipeline and how do we prepare ourselves for that. And it's more than just public housing. We have also refinanced and repositioned 4 of our farm worker developments. So it's beyond public housing. It is into our other programs. Repositioning, meaning the reinvestment and the redevelopment of the properties. And as we go into it, it's really not a one-size-fits-all approach. It really is asking the question of each asset, what's the best use for it? So we have, for example, built something new in Reedley, and then we transferred the rental assistance from the public housing because the public housing units were just not salvageable. They were not something we wanted to keep in our portfolio. They were not good for the families who lived there. Or we have, in Fowler, we took a 12-unit community. We bought some adjacent land and we rebuilt 60 units of housing. So it became not just the replacement housing, but also new housing for our portfolio. So I would just say we've been really thinking hard about each community and really trying to figure out what's the long-term best answer for that community. And I should also say, because I just answered that all not in the right priority, which is the first priority should be, what's the impact on the people who live there? How do we make it a better community for those who live there? And so all of our redevelopments include more community space, libraries on site. The other thing that we've done in all of our tax credit deals, but we also did this within our public housing repositioning, is that we moved above the line $400 per unit per year in resident services. So I think RAD requires $25 a year or something like that for resident engagement. We put above the line $400 per household per year. So our resident services budget has grown by over $2 million with all of our tax credit units. And that really allows us to partner more and bring in more activities within our sites to say that we're more than sticks and bricks, that we are all about transforming lives of the families that live in our housing. The RAD process for us was it expedited the removal of the ACC. That was great. It allowed us to use public housing reserves in a non-public housing development with a project-based voucher post redevelopment. Those two things are great, but I'd say the entire philosophy about what we're doing in repositioning our housing started long before RAD came along. And it was really this intentional decision about what we wanted within our assets and our properties.
So what you've been able to do is you've been able to take that, brilliant side of your mind and your real estate developer mind where you really thrive, but yet you've also been able to, marriage with that some of your strong community-based leadership style, that actually when people know you, they know that you're in both spaces. And sometimes people kind of gravitate toward one or the other, but you have found that happy marriage there. Which reminds me, interestingly enough, a couple months ago, there was a tweet that you actually tweeted about how the Board of Commissioners for Fresno was dedicated to overcoming obstacles, right? The person responded back. And so I have here, so you're going to laugh here. We talk about laughing, right? So you're going to laugh here because I actually have this tweet, but I want to read it because it takes a glimpse here of who you are. And this person responds back in their tweet and it says, I agree completely. And the one time I got to meet you in person was terrific. It's been one of the proudest and most accomplished moments in my lifetime. You are great at what you do, and I wish you nothing but the best in the future. Tell us, okay, what are you doing? If you're saying, you're doing such a great job that you're getting like tweet crushes here. Okay. I mean, this is amazing because most of the time you kind of get the conflict pieces here, but people are tweeting this to you. So this is when I said happy marriage between the redevelopment and community-based leadership styles here. Tell us not just who you are, but I want to actually have a walk away here with you describing who you are as a leader.
Yeah, that's one of the most embarrassing tweets I have ever received. I can't believe that's the one you pulled up. How humbling is that?
Was it a resident?
Yes.
Okay. And see
Yes.
that's my point. It's
Yeah.
when I said tweet crush, but I mean, honestly, you're changing a life here and you're not just changing a unit. You're not just making sure the work orders are done and, the adjusted income calculations are right. See, this is so much bigger than this. And that's what I want to highlight here.
Well, I do have to admit that I don't know how to do a rent calculation, so I can't really talk about that. In my whole career, I've never done a 50058 or a 50059 and not even sure if that's what they're called.
Some people would tell you not to admit to that, but I'm sure your staff love to actually know that they can and you can't.
Yeah, I always try to be upfront about what my talents are and what they're not. Yeah, so I feel again, like the story with the formerly homeless individual who ended up giving me a hug after not wanting to shake my hand. I feel like that the interactions that I want to have with the residents that we serve is one that just starts from a place where they know that they are valued, and if I can say it, that they are loved, right? That there's no judgment on my part or the agency's part. It's all about being vulnerable and authentic, because uh, I'd be lying if I said every time I put myself out there, of course, it's warmly received. It's just not true. Like 1 out of 10 times, I get someone who says, not that they just don't want to give me a hug, but like, who are you? I had one person say, like, I'm going to knock that smile off your face. And I was like, I thought I was just opening up and trying to see them. And of course, I totally understood. Like, they didn't want to be seen the way I was looking, right? That was very intrusive to them, right? So I make mistakes all the time, but the bottom line is I want to be authentic. I want to be accessible. I don't necessarily want the recognition through a tweet to go out. That not that I'm condemning her for writing that tweet, and if she listens to this, I want to say to her, thank you. It was humbling, and I did totally appreciate it. But that's not why I do it, right? I'm not doing it for the recognition on a public level. It's really about recognizing and seeing others. To me, that's the most important thing we can do. I'm not trying to be political, but I have to tell you, the times I've seen Cory Booker speak, he always talks about seeing people. And I never was able to put words to it until I heard him talk about it, but that it's so important to see people, and people want to be seen. I just really believe that.
And what happened there is that you saw her and she actually conveyed back to you what her heart was feeling. So for you to have a leadership style that has really permeated that level of service and passion, is very impressive. And I do think that in this industry, to kind of what we said in the very beginning here, just focus on the regulatory compliance piece. And it's just so much more than that. It is a heartstring job in some domain because you see people who are in need, or you see people who, want to make improvements and for whatever reason are, struggling. And that's not for us to judge, but we need to see them. We need to recognize the need. And so many of us are passionate about making sure we can try to help them move forward if that is what they've identified, as their goal. And, your leadership style, like I said, is just taking a really holistic approach to this. And great job for you and your team. And I do thank you for taking the time here. You are such an innovator in this space and sharing exact ways that people can move forward. And so thank you for your words.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.